if you are going to draw the mainstream into your movement, which I think was the power of Occupy, then you've got to work within those limits. I have, like probably many people in this room, serious issues with the very concept of a wage economy. And yet I think people have to be brought into movement step by step. There was tremendous sympathy throughout the country for the Occupy encampments, and in particular Occupy Wall Street, and you saw it, especially after the police that first week carried out the pepper spraying of the 3 women who were kettled behind the netting. There was a kind of revulsion at what was happening. Occupy created a discourse that had been absent within the mainstream, and the mainstream responded. And they saw that the Occupy movement articulated what they were undergoing and what they were enduring, and the kinds of questions that were not being addressed and asked by our class of pundits and our political leaders. And I think, again, going back to something I've said repeatedly throughout this discourse, the power that we have is going to be in our ability to bring the kinds of numbers into the streets that were brought into Tahrir Square, that were brought into Alexanderplatz in East Berlin with the fall of the communist government, that were brought into Wenceslas Square in the Velvet Revolution, which I also covered. If we can't bring those numbers in, then I don't think we have much chance of succeeding as a movement.
Thank you. Okay, the next question, excuse me. The next question, the next question is from Wayne Price for Brian. Chris says that the Black Bloc makes it difficult to make a mainstream movement. Brian, how would you build a popular big movement? And then for Chris, is the mainstream all that counts? What about militancy?
So I should start this one. Hey Wayne, it's nice to know that you're out there somewhere. Thank you. I've enjoyed our previous interactions. I guess in terms of how to build a popular big movement, this is a challenging question today, and a question that we could get into really deep. You know, it used to be that you could just build a workers' movement. Nowadays, we pass from job to job so fast that it's really hard to hold on to any kind of situation from which we can organize with others like us. It's not surprising that the major anti-capitalist or potentially anti-capitalist movement that took off in the last couple of years was situated outside the workplace in public squares where the disenfranchised are, you know, or where people who have enough time between their 10 different Craigslist jobs can show up to participate. Building a movement when we are atomized like this by capitalism is a real challenge. The main thing that I would say is that it's a process of building bridges and connections between people in different situations, people who are marginalized in different ways. And that's why, in addition to participating in militant forms of struggle, I think it's very important to always set about the process of explaining ourselves and connecting with others, to try to say why it is that I, as a marginally employed, you know, late 30s anarchist, am involved in the things that I am. And this is the closest I can give you, Mr. Price, I fear, is make the effort to connect with other people who are vulnerable or targeted in the same or different ways by capitalism, figure out what we can do together, and move forward.
Well, the state did not look at the Occupy endeavor as a mainstream movement. They looked at it as a militant movement. Of course, those of us, and not only was it militant, let's be clear, it was revolutionary. Because it did, as Crane Brinton writes in his study of revolutions, Anatomy of a Revolution, it did finally what all revolutions do. It demanded of the state terms that the state can never fulfill because it would mean its own dissolution. It asked, remember they kept saying on a sort of, what are your demands, what are your demands, what are your demands? Well, the demand was really clear. We want to reverse the corporate coup d'etat that we've undergone. But that's not a demand that the power elite can hear, because what we're asking is that they go out of existence. And that's why I think what we have unleashed is a movement. And remember, revolutionary movements take a long time to build. The Stamp Act, or the Stamp Rebellion in 1765, was the precursor to the revolution in 1776. The uprisings in Russia in 1905 was the precursor to 1917. That's what we've begun. But it will change. It will mutate. It needs to be deeply self-critical and smart. If you look at the history of the civil rights movement, like any movement, it's never a straight line. There were terrible failures in Albany, Mississippi, and other places, reverses, but it was the capacity within the civil rights movement or within Solidarity. Go back and look at the 10 years of Solidarity before it achieved power to understand what worked, what didn't work, what was a dead end, and what wasn't. And I think that we live in a period where by the language that we use to describe both our reality and our political system no longer work. And in some ways, one of the first things we're doing is begin to look for a new language by which to describe what's happening to us.
The next question is for Brian. What use is Black Bloc tactics when violence is used against occupiers? And they've given the reference of the live stream of Oakland protests when occupiers are protesting peacefully. When Black Blocs showed up, occupiers tried to protest police protect people in a store, and Black Bloc protesters attacked occupiers.
Black Bloc protesters. Okay, well, I wasn't there, so I can't speak to this in particular. It's worth saying that I am not saying that every time someone breaks a window or attacks someone else that it is a good thing. Just to clarify, the heart of my point is that the criteria according to which we critique militant action have to be more precise than these people are outsiders, these people are monsters. Sure, there are plenty of cases in which people do things that are unstrategic or even downright bad, but it just obscures the question, makes it more difficult to discuss this if every time a criticism of a specific event is advanced, it's part of a general delegitimizing of the target of that criticism. That's the best I can do, not having noticed this event, not having been there. All right, thank you.
Okay. The next question is for Chris. Do you support turning in Black Bloc members to the police? What levels of violence are you willing to use against those who do not fit your definition of peaceful?
No, I'm not going to turn people into the police. And what was the second question? Look, I'm opposed to violence. And I really don't buy this argument about, who gets to define violence. I'll tell you who gets to define violence. The victims get to define violence. My closest friend in high school was gay, and he was an evangelical. And his father berated him as a faggot, and the church told him he was filled with Satan and unclean, and he committed suicide. As far as I know, he was never physically touched. And yet I think his father and his church committed an act of murder. Violence comes in many, many forms. It's not physical. It can be verbal. There are many ways to destroy human beings. We have armies of psychologists in Guantanamo who know, without touching you, how to reduce you to a fetal position and a quivering mass. And so this sort of gradations of violence, what is violence? Violence, it's those who suffer from violence, those who are victims of violence. They are the only people, in my mind, who have a legitimate right to tell us what violence is.
The next question sounds like a really big one that I'm not sure if you can each answer in 1 minute, but I'll put it out there and see what you want to do. Can you both please explain your theory of change? What do you each see as the best strategy to build power and win material gains for the 99%? In 1 minute.
Do you want to go first, Chris?
Well, whatever we do, change is coming. It's coming with the implosion of our imperium, and it's coming with the rapid degradation of the ecosystem itself. And there's nothing we can do to stop it. It's how will we cope with this change? Will we respond rationally? Will we learn to speak to the world with a new humility and recreate structures within our own communities for sustainability? Or will we continue to live in illusion? The response to the climate crisis is a perfect example. We have half of the country that denies that climate change exists and the other half arguing that we can adapt. Both are forms of magical thinking. The fact is we can no longer afford